Good morning. Thank you, Esther, for inviting me here. The way the rain was this morning, I thought there would be an empty hall, but this is an important topic, and people won't let a few drops keep them away. Listening to the introduction, I finally thought I knew what I might talk about this morning, and it's the issue of stigma. Stigma of people suffering from mental health issues. I started psychiatry in a very heady, optimistic time. I made Aliyah in 1986 ultimately from Brooklyn. This crowd might appreciate Brooklyn, and 3 weeks later, I started my residency training. And at the time, we just knew that we were going to solve the problem of mental health. I mean, there were these medications which were still new, relatively new, in a sense that finally we have something to do to help. Finally, we psychiatrists are also doctors. We also write these illegible Latin letters on little slips and pass. I knew that would happen. Sorry. And we create side effects and do all kinds of things that real doctors do. And we knew that it would get even better because the brain was still in 1986 uncharted territory, and we understood we'd know a lot more about it, as indeed we have. The brain sciences are fascinating. What we know today, what we can see today, glimpse of the brain in action. We knew that genetics would develop. I mean, in the beginning of my career, I did some genetics research. You would take a single gene and examine how it works out in a family. We didn't even know how many genes people had. And then in the 90s, we finally mapped out the whole genome, all of the genes, and for the first time we knew there are like 20,000 genes for people, which is a little bit insulting because there are some vegetables which have more genes than we do. But certainly knowing all this, we'd be able to figure it out. And the next generation of medications would be more effective, and they would be and they would cause less side effects, and uva letzion goel, uva leolam goel. That's not the way it worked out. That's not the way it worked out. Medications today are not better than they were in the 1950s and 60s when we first started developing. I wouldn't say developing them because they were originally found by serendipity. It was like an accident that this works, and then we tried to reverse engineer to understand how they work. And the side effects are changed. Whether they're better or worse is a matter of the patient's preference mainly. And meanwhile, we cause certain problems. I remember the 1990s were declared the decade of the brain. Some of you weren't born yet, but it was. And the idea was that we would translate mental problems, psychiatric problems, into brain problems, and then no more stigma. Am I embarrassed if I have a problem with my lungs, with my pancreas? No, people have problems. They have problems with their brain. Big deal. Don't worry about it. I thought so too, and what a terrible mistake that was. What a terrible mistake that was. First of all, without claiming to understand the connection between body and soul, body and mind, however we choose to call it, the fact is that there are things which happen in the mind, which, though I firmly believe they all have a basis in the brain, but they don't occur in the brain. Brains don't hurt, brains aren't sad, people are sad. There's a certain subjectivity which neuroscientists still have not figured out how this subjectivity, this idea, this feel of things can come out of an inanimate brain, but somehow it does. These are the mysteries of creation. And But when you talk about the brain and you only see the brain, then the person gets lost because the person isn't there, the person is here. You know, I'm talking now, and for those who are still listening, you're trying to understand what I'm saying, what's the meaning of my words, maybe why I bothered to come here to say. These are things which happen when you talk to somebody in any kind of circumstance, unless you are labeled as a mental patient and you meet a psychiatrist. Because a psychiatrist too often, of course, these are examples. Most of my colleagues are truly good people, well-meaning people who I refer to often. But there's a certain idea, which I see especially in young psychiatrists who learn the wrong things, that how does a psychiatrist listen? I think there's too much activity in the mesolimbic area of the brain. Oh dear, I think the logical sequence from sentence to sentence is a bit shaky over here. I'm not sure that idea is culturally acceptable, which a psychiatrist has to think about these things. But what about thinking, what is he trying to say? Oh, if he has voices, what are the voices saying? You know, you don't have to know what a voice is saying in order to decide which medication and how much of it you want to prescribe. But if you want to understand the person, then you better listen. You better listen because there's some very important content over there. So the idea, with time, with disillusionment, it's sort of an unrequited love that I thought these medications would be so wonderful, and they disappointed. They disappointed that they're not that wonderful. They're less effective than was often trumpeted. And they also caused a certain distortion, not only in the profession, but in society as a whole, about how we relate to human suffering. I remember in Manhattan, there's a sign on the side of a building about 8 stories high. If you are depressed, it is a chemical imbalance. Now, again, I'm not denying the brain basis of everything, not just things pathological. Of my talking to you, the brain is certainly involved. But what's the difference between someone who has distress and thinks that, what's wrong with my life? What am I doing wrong? Why is this happening to me? Or somebody who thinks, I have a chemical imbalance. You know, I sometimes people call me up. These are usually, I must say, North Americans, and say, doctor, can you help me? What's the problem? I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. Now, that is already these ideas filtering down into the general culture, that it's a brain problem. And you come to the psychiatrist the way, I don't know, the way you go to a gastroenterologist. Listen, I have my belly hurts, so can you examine me? And I don't know what my belly is, but take care of it, please, oh doctor. That should not be the way it works in psychiatry, where it is so crucial to recruit the patient as a partner. I'm a psychiatrist. I know a lot about the brain, about medication, about side effects, about all kinds of issues here in treatment. You're the person with your own subjectivity. You know what's disturbing you. You know what the difficulty is. You know how you've reacted in the past to medication. You know what's important for you. And that partnership is so essential. For many years, I was in charge of a closed ward, and you know, I started with this belief that things would get better and better, but they didn't get better and better. And I would see people coming in sometimes for a first hospitalization, and they still, you know, look you in the eye. They expect treatment. They expect to be heard. They expect to be respected. 2 or 3 days later, they learned where they arrived. They understood where they are, and they really shouldn't demand anything. I teach, I try to explain to psychiatrists with a limited effect, especially residents who are in training and they have an exam where they have to interview a patient, an actual patient with 3 senior psychiatrists testing them. Is one of the most stressful moments of a psychiatrist's career. And they have like 35 minutes to talk to them, and always the interview starts with, "So tell me why you're hospitalized." Now, when you think about that, you don't know the person, and there's a person there, a person feeling things, and he can be ashamed of things, and you're saying, I don't know you, you don't know me, but let's talk about this shameful thing, how somehow you got to this place and you're so messed up. Tell me about it. That is so different from starting an interview with, so tell me about yourself, where you actually express an interest in the person. And in this field, we can't forget that. The person who's there, who needs to be our partner, who needs to help us. I don't think there are any psychiatrists in this audience, so what I'm saying is sort of pshita, it's obvious. But in certain quarters, this can be controversial, which is hard to imagine, but it is. That is what led me, in the closed ward, there was a sense that, with time, the quality of the staff improved, and there was a lot of caring, but the system was messed up, and any change you do was a bit tovel v'sheretz biyado. There was a sense that I don't know who thought up the idea that you could put 30 or 40 or 50 insane people in a place not larger than this, and something good will come of it. So this is what finally led me to say, we just, we can't do more patches here, a little fine-tuning. No, you have to sort of get rid of the system and start anew. And that's why I started the Soteria home, based on a model which was tried in California in the 1970s, and there have been several other houses since then. There's a house like that in Bern in Switzerland, which will soon be celebrating its 40th year, but that's rare. Most of these Soteria houses don't last very long. And the idea is very simple in a Soteria home. First of all, you don't have 30, 40, 50 people. You have at most 10. And you view suffering as a human problem, which requires a humane solution. Again, I expect you to say, like, what? Now, that's it? That's the chiddush? That's obviously. But no, this comes after decades of saying it's a brain problem. And if he's suffering, let's tweak the neural receptor and we'll solve the problem. Let there be no misunderstanding. I'm not anti-medications. I prescribe them. I wouldn't want to go back to a world without them by any means, but you have to have a perspective of when they're good and when they're not good, and how to use them, and how they are almost never the central part of the therapeutic plan. So we set up a home 7.5 years ago, and in the center of town. The hospital where I worked was, one side of it was Hamnuchot, and the other side, and across the street was the Mizbala Ironit, the municipal garbage dump, and down in the valley was a shooting range, which is, you don't like to hear shots if you have paranoid tendencies. It's not advisable, and instead of that, we set up a home, a wonderful home in the center of town. You had like 5 minutes to one side was Mea Shearim, and 5 minutes to the other side was a main police station. Sometimes we needed them, sometimes we needed them, but we managed to treat people like, well, I guess like people. You go into a Soteria home and you really I really have trouble if I don't know the people, knowing who's there to give help, who's there to get help. The center, you have professional staff, relatively less than in a hospital, but the main thing is you have the milavim. These are people, good people, who are chosen because of who they are, not what they did. People who can contain the intensity of people in extreme mental distress, extreme emotional distress. Many of them are students in related fields. And you don't get better experience than in a home like this about what treating mental health, psychiatric problems, emotional problems, extreme states is all about. Many of them have themselves been many of the milavim, the companions, have themselves been hospitalized in the past. And it just maintains a very friendly atmosphere, or as my friend and partner in all that I do here, Remy Friedlander, who I knew because he was hospitalized in my department in 2005, and he would be upset if I didn't use his name, so it's okay. And he recently finished his doctorate in clinical psychology, and now he's doing a postdoc with me. But he described a Soteria home as a mishpacha bruchat yiladim im tzrachim miyuchadim b'chofesh hagadol. You know, that's how you try to you try to handle to be with the people. Being with liyotim is a central part of what Soteria does. It's less a therapeutic technique than providing the basis where a person can feel that he's not threatened, he's not stigmatized. People listen non-judgmentally. He can talk about it. Somebody, for example, so many stories, you don't have time, but somebody was convinced that he had violated every law in the book, and he was in terrible distress about it. So what do? You know, you increase the medication, you tell him, stop this nonsense, you're a good kid, don't worry about it. Well, what we did in Soteria was one of the companions, remember I said the police station is 5 minutes away, 3 minutes away. We went with him so that he could file a complaint about himself. And the police, in general, they are so wonderful. Like right away, they grasp what's happening. So they, he takes down the full report, reads it back, stamps it, gives a copy to the kid. He came back beaming to the house, like he was so happy that that he could show us that it's now on file. And he really did well subsequently. The kind of way people talk, and it's. Why do I give lectures? Because it's the only place where I'm called professor. In a home, I'm Pesach, and it's very much, begova ha'inayim, people talk to you and don't cause problems. We in the center of town, we've since relocated near Miskav Ladach now, but there's a lot of drugs. And we had somebody who, like a couple of months, he wasn't getting better, and he was very psychotic, and he had a past of drugs. And I remember I really was worried he was just getting drugs, and that's why he wasn't improving. And now, we don't usually test people for drugs, but I thought it was necessary. And I remember going to him on the patio. He's smoking a cigarette, nothing else. And I say, listen, I've thought about it, and I'm worried, and we really, I want to test your urine for drugs. And I remember, he took another puff, said, Pesach, I'm really disappointed in you. Now, just think about a place where you can tell that to the psychiatrist. The test was negative, incidentally, and things got better after that. But that's just a little tiny vignette to kind of convey something about the feeling of the place. Now, it was wonderful that the first year that we existed, we were unofficial. we didn't have approval, and and it was not easy operating in a place like this, which isn't approved by the authorities, and at some point, I asked a senior lawyer who specializes in suing doctors whether I'm running a risk. And he was very nice, and he listened to me, and he said, Bet din shel mala, you have some zchuyot, but bet din shel mata, you may run into problems. And I sent him all of our material, and a day later he wrote a long opinion, chavat dat, the bottom line being that when the inevitable catastrophe happens, you and your staff will lose, you lose your license, your property, and your liberty. That I admit stressed me very much. We actually closed the house for a few days until we could convince the insurance people not to take back their insurance. But within a year, which is extremely rapid for a government office, I'd been part of a staff writing the guidelines for such a house, and that was the basis of the batim maazanim. And after that, after we had that, it was a wonderful year. I mean, to operate a year without regulation from the government is a dream, which I knew would not come back. But having regulation allowed more people to set up these houses. So they're not strictly Soteria. Soteria is a little bit more ideological. Doesn't matter. There's a lot more like Soteria than they are like the hospital, which they're meant to replace. At the time, I remember that after a year or two, I said that I made some calculation, and I said that we need 130 homes, batim maazanim, in order to supply the demand which this country has. And everybody said, where'd you get that number from? Okay, that's enough. Anyway, I just want to say that today there are 27 homes officially operating, recognized by the government, 27. And 2 months ago in Vadat Abriut of the Knesset, the Health Committee, the CEO Bar Simantov said that he would see to it that there are 25 new houses a year for the next 4 years, which, do the math, 27 plus 100. It hasn't, no, that applause is premature. We'll see if that happens. But hey, it's not just saying that. It's much easier. It was much harder to get from 0 to 1. It took me 11 and a half years than to get from 1 to 130. The problem is that there are people who cannot go into a community home like that because they refuse to, and they're obviously dangerous. I'm talking about serious dangers. And there's still a need for a hospital. So what do you do about those people who will not be accepted into the community? They will not agree to be accepted. They will only go under coercion, and coercion is obviously a no-no in a Soteria home, and all the batim maazanim. That's why 2 years ago I went back to the closed ward, a different one. This time your neighbors in Kfar Shaul, for the purpose of seeing if I could do the same sort of thing in a population of people from a closed ward. And I thought it would take 2 months. It only took 2 years. It's better than the 11 years it took me to set up the first home. And yesterday we started the training course for the staff. Again, a lot of companions and the professional staff. And in 3 weeks we're going to start getting people in who will be helping. A different people much more seriously in distress than what can go into the community homes. And we have 10 beds there, not 30 or 40 or 50. And frankly, you can throw out all of the Soteria ideas. Just give me a unit of 10 beds. It'll already be much better than 30 or 40 or 50. And there is already a similar department, which is operating a few months in Mazor Hospital in Akko. They took the idea of Soteria, and they're also trying to apply it inpatient. And the idea here is that, first of all, I hope that there'll be less hospital beds because the community will be stronger. There'll be more clinics, more daycare, more batim maazanim, and allow less hospital beds, which is what the people would want themselves if we would just ask them, and we're learning to give them a voice. But the idea is that for the hospital beds which remain, this should become the norm. This should become the norm. Units of 10, maybe 12 people, much more homey environment, without the stigma. Stigma is not a new problem. And it's in Baba Kama it says, "Shoteh en lo boshet." If you do damage to a shoteh, which kind of means a mental patient, then you don't have to pay for defamation because he's already a shoteh. You can't, you don't get any lower than that, the Gemara says. And there's a discussion about it. It's not that the Gemara supports that kind of stigma, but it certainly reflects societal stigmas which go a long way back. And the idea over here is doing something which recognizes the essential humanity of all the people who need this kind of help, whether they're in the community or in the hospital. And the change is happening in the community. There's nothing like it other places in the world where we have all of these houses with around-the-clock care in a community home. And I'm hoping that this will take another few years, I hope not too many, where people understand this is the way that the inpatient ward also needs to be run. Okay, thank you very much.